The letter arrived on a cold morning. Governor John White unfolded the parchment with trembling hands. The ink was smudged, the edges worn from weeks at sea. But the message inside was clear. The colony was struggling. Food was running low. Relations with the local tribes were uncertain. Supplies were nearly gone. And winter was coming. White stared out the window of his small cottage in Plymouth as the wind rattled the wooden shutters. Across the harbor, ships rocked in the gray Atlantic waves. Far across that same ocean, thousands of miles away, his daughter and newborn granddaughter were waiting. His granddaughter had a name that would become legend: Virginia Dare. She was the first English child born in the New World, and now she might be starving. White closed his eyes. He had helped build the colony of Roanoke Island, believing it would become the first permanent English settlement in America, a new beginning, a new civilization. But the Atlantic Ocean had turned that dream into a nightmare. Storms had delayed ships, war with Spain had diverted resources, and now, nearly 3 years later, no one knew what had happened to the settlers left behind. Not a single message, not a single survivor, just silence. The dream of a new world. The story had begun years earlier with a man obsessed with exploration. His name was Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh believed England needed a foothold in the New World. Spain had already built a vast empire across the Americas, flooding Europe with gold and silver. England wanted its share. So Raleigh proposed something bold: a permanent English colony in North America. Queen Elizabeth I approved the plan. If successful, it would weaken Spanish dominance and open new trade routes. Raleigh never personally traveled to America. Instead, he sent expeditions. The first arrived in 1584. They explored the coastline of what is now North Carolina. The explorers returned with incredible stories: endless forests, fertile land, friendly native tribes, fish so plentiful they could be caught by hand. The place seemed like paradise. They named the region Virginia in honor of the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth I. Soon after, Raleigh organized a second expedition. This time, families, not soldiers, would build the colony. Men, women, and children. A real community, a permanent home. The journey across the Atlantic. In 1587, 3 ships set sail from England. On board were about 115 settlers, farmers, craftsmen, women, children, and Governor John White. White had a difficult job. He had to lead the colony, maintain peace with the local tribes, and ensure survival in a completely unfamiliar land. Among the settlers was his daughter, Eleanor Dare. She was pregnant. After weeks at sea, the ships finally reached the coast of North America. They landed on Roanoke Island. The settlers immediately began building homes. Wooden cottages rose among the trees. Gardens were planted. Fishing nets were cast into the water. For a brief moment, the colony seemed hopeful. Then, something historic happened. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth. The baby girl was named Virginia Dare. The entire colony celebrated, the first English child born in America, a symbol of a new future. But the celebration did not last long. Trouble begins. The colony quickly realized something terrifying. The settlement left behind by the earlier expedition had been destroyed. Buildings were damaged, supplies were gone, relations with nearby tribes had become hostile. Food shortages began almost immediately. The settlers begged Governor White to return to England and bring supplies. White didn't want to leave. His daughter and granddaughter were here.
But the colony had no choice. Without help, everyone would die. Reluctantly, White agreed. In late 1587, he boarded a ship and sailed back to England. He promised the colonists he would return quickly, within a few months. But history had other plans. War changes everything. Just as White arrived in England, disaster struck Europe. Spain was preparing to invade England with a massive fleet known as the Spanish Armada. Every available ship was needed for war. The English government seized civilian vessels for the navy. White's supply ships were taken. Months passed, then a year, then 2 years. White begged officials for permission to return, but England was fighting for survival. No ships could be spared. By the time the war ended, 3 long years had passed. White feared the worst. Still, he refused to give up. Finally, in 1590, he secured passage across the Atlantic. The journey was brutal. Storms battered the ships. Sailors fell ill. But at last, they reached Roanoke Island. White rushed ashore. He expected to see the colony. Smoke rising from chimneys, children playing in the fields, voices calling from the houses. Instead, there was only silence. The empty colony. The houses were gone, not destroyed, carefully dismantled. The fort had vanished. No bodies, no graves, no signs of battle. Just empty land. Then White noticed something carved on a wooden post. One single word: CROATOAN. Nearby, 3 letters were carved on a tree: C-R-O. White recognized the word immediately. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island and tribe. Today, it is known as Hatteras Island. Before leaving 3 years earlier, White had made an agreement with the settlers. If they moved somewhere else, they would carve the destination into a tree. If they were forced to leave under danger, they would carve a cross symbol. There was no cross, only the word CROATOAN. Hope surged through White. Maybe the settlers had simply relocated. Maybe his daughter and granddaughter were alive. He immediately ordered the ships to sail toward CROATOAN Island. But the ocean had other plans. A massive storm rolled across the Atlantic. Waves slammed against the ships. The captains refused to risk the journey. They turned back. White never saw the colony again. He never saw his family again. And the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke was born. A mystery that still haunts America. More than 400 years later, historians are still searching for answers. What happened to the 115 settlers? Did they join native tribes? Did they starve? Were they attacked? Or did something even stranger happen? Archaeologists have found clues. Old maps, strange carvings, artifacts buried beneath the soil. Each discovery reveals a little more of the story, but the full truth remains hidden, somewhere in the forests of North Carolina, waiting.
In a quiet archive room in London, a group of historians leaned over a fragile piece of parchment. The map was more than 4 centuries old. Its edges were yellow and cracked with age. The ink had faded in places, but the coastline was still clearly visible. It was drawn by John White, the same man who had returned to the abandoned colony of Roanoke Island in 1590 and discovered the mysterious word carved into the wood: CROATOAN. For centuries, historians believed the map was nothing more than a simple exploration chart of early Virginia. But that day, researchers noticed something strange. In the corner of the map, a small patch of paper had been glued over part of the drawing. It looked deliberate, almost like someone had tried to hide something. Carefully, using delicate tools and magnifying lenses, the historians began lifting the tiny patch. Underneath it, they found a symbol,
a small red star-shaped marking, and beside it a faint drawing of what looked like a fort. The room went silent, because that symbol was located nearly 50 miles inland from Roanoke Island. If the marking was real, then the settlers may have had a secret plan all along. A plan to move inland. The coast of North America was dangerous in the 1500s. Storms regularly smashed ships against the shoreline. Hurricanes flooded low-lying islands. Sandbanks shifted constantly, making navigation treacherous. Roanoke Island itself was vulnerable. Food was scarce, and hostile tribes surrounded the colony. But inland, things were different. The forests were rich with animals. The soil was fertile. Rivers provided fresh water and transportation routes. If the settlers wanted to survive long-term, moving inland would make sense. The hidden fort symbol on White's map pointed toward the region near the CROATOAN River, a location deep within the forests of what is now North Carolina. Far from the storms of the Atlantic, far from enemies, hidden. The lost journey. Imagine the moment when the settlers of Roanoke realized Governor White was not coming back soon. Months passed, then a year, then another. Food supplies dwindled. Children cried from hunger. The leaders of the colony likely faced a difficult choice: stay on the island and slowly starve, or risk everything by traveling into unknown lands. They chose the second option. Over 100 settlers would have packed their belongings, tools, weapons, seeds, cooking pots. They dismantled their wooden homes for materials. Boards could be reused for boats, carts, or new houses. Then the entire colony began moving. Men carrying muskets, women carrying children, families pushing carts through dense forests. The journey inland would have taken days, perhaps weeks, but if the secret map is correct, they had a destination, a hidden fort. Archaeology begins to confirm the theory. In the early 2000s, archaeologists began exploring the inland region marked on White's map. The site became known as Site X. The name was chosen to keep the location secret from treasure hunters and looters. Researchers began digging carefully through layers of soil. At first, they found nothing unusual, just fragments of pottery used by Native American tribes, animal bones, stone tools. Then something unexpected appeared. A small shard of English pottery, not Native American, not Spanish, English, dating to the late 1500s, the exact period of the Roanoke colony. Excitement spread through the archaeological team because English artifacts should not have been there. Roanoke was supposed to be the only English settlement in the region at the time. Yet here, far inland, evidence suggested otherwise. The first clues. More artifacts began appearing: a metal rapier sword hilt, fragments of European ceramics, and pieces of gunflint used in early English muskets. Each discovery suggested that English settlers had once been present in the area. But something else made the findings even more fascinating. The artifacts were mixed with Native American objects: stone arrowheads, clay cooking vessels, decorative beads. It looked like two cultures had lived together, side by side, or perhaps become one. The tribe that remembered. Not far from the inland excavation sites, once lived a powerful native tribe known as the Lumbee tribe. For generations, members of the Lumbee tribe had passed down unusual stories. Stories about their ancestors who had light-colored eyes. Stories about people in their tribe who could read English words long before American colonization spread across the region. Some Lumbee oral traditions claimed their ancestors had once sheltered lost English settlers. Historians long dismissed these stories as myths, but archaeological discoveries began changing minds. What if the Lumbee were telling the truth? What if the Roanoke colonists had survived by joining native communities? The CROATOAN connection. Remember the word carved at Roanoke, CROATOAN. The CROATOAN tribe lived on what is now Hatteras Island. Their leader, Manteo, had been one of the earliest native allies of the English explorers. He had even traveled to England and met Queen Elizabeth I. Unlike many other tribes, the CROATOAN people were friendly toward the settlers. It's possible the Roanoke colonists first moved to CROATOAN territory. From there, some groups may have migrated inland. Others may have stayed along the coast. Over time, they could have merged into different native tribes, their English identity slowly fading. A chilling discovery. During one excavation near the inland site, archaeologists uncovered something unsettling, a fragment of a slate writing tablet. In the 1500s, English settlers often used small slate boards to practice writing. Children learned the alphabet by scratching letters onto the surface. When researchers examined the fragment under magnification, they saw faint markings, letters, possibly English. If confirmed, it would be one of the strongest pieces of evidence that English settlers once lived at the site. But the full inscription was too damaged to read. Another clue, another mystery. The disappearance that changed America. The fate of the Roanoke colony may seem like a small historical mystery, just 115 missing people, but its impact on American history is enormous. When English settlers finally established a permanent colony at Jamestown in 1607, they arrived with fear in their hearts. They had heard the story of the lost colony, the vanished settlers, the mysterious word carved in wood. The forests of North America suddenly seemed darker, more dangerous, as if something had swallowed the Roanoke colony whole. But what if the truth is far less mysterious? What if the settlers didn't vanish at all? What if they survived, adapted, and became part of the land they once tried to colonize? If that is true, then somewhere in the forests and towns of North Carolina today, there may be descendants of the lost colony still living, unaware of their connection to one of the greatest mysteries in American history. But one discovery could change everything. In 2015, archaeologists made another discovery on Hatteras Island. This time, it was a gold signet ring, a ring that looked unmistakably English, dating from the exact period of the Roanoke colony. If the ring truly belonged to one of the settlers, it could prove that at least some colonists survived on CROATOAN land. But who owned the ring, and how did it end up buried beneath centuries of sand? Those answers would lead historians into an even deeper mystery, one involving hidden graves, forgotten alliances, and a story that might finally reveal what really happened to the lost colony.
Part 2. The CROATOAN Clue. The storm came without warning. Dark clouds rolled across the Atlantic sky like a curtain being pulled over the world. The waves around Roanoke Island grew violent, slamming against the wooden hulls of the English ships. Governor John White stood on the deck, gripping the railing with white knuckles. Rain soaked through his clothes, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the shoreline. Somewhere beyond those trees, his daughter might still be alive, and his granddaughter, Virginia Dare. The sailors shouted as the wind howled through the rigging. "Governor, we cannot sail south in this weather." White ignored them. "Just a little further," he said desperately. "CROATOAN Island is not far." But the captain shook his head. No man sails into a hurricane willingly. Lightning flashed across the sky. The sea rose like a mountain beneath the ship. Within minutes, the captain made the decision that would haunt history. They would turn back. The last look. As the ship slowly turned away from the coast, White stared at the distant forests. He had waited 3 years to return. 3 years imagining the moment he would see his family again. Now he was leaving without even knowing if they were alive.
White collapsed onto a wooden crate on the deck. The rain washed down his face, mixing with tears. That was the last time John White ever saw the shores of Roanoke. The word that started the mystery. But that one word remained: CROATOAN. It was carved deeply into a wooden post, clean, careful, deliberate, not the desperate scratchings of frightened settlers. White immediately understood its meaning. CROATOAN was the name of a friendly native tribe that lived on a nearby island. Today we call it Hatteras Island. Years earlier, English explorers had formed an alliance with the tribe. The CROATOAN people had helped them survive. They shared food. They taught them how to fish the coastal waters. They showed them which plants were safe to eat. Their chief was a man named Manteo. Manteo had even traveled to England once. He spoke some English. He understood both worlds. White believed that if the settlers had moved anywhere, it would be CROATOAN. Why the colony might have left. Historians today believe the settlers had several reasons to abandon Roanoke Island. First, food shortages. The colony was struggling almost immediately after White left in 1587. The soil on Roanoke Island was sandy and poor for farming. Fishing helped, but it wasn't enough for over 100 people. Second, hostile tribes. Not all native tribes trusted the English. One of the most powerful leaders in the region was Winganaw. Winganaw had once been friendly with English explorers, but relations deteriorated after conflicts over food and territory. Eventually, English soldiers killed him. After that, many native tribes in the region became enemies of the colony. The settlers were vulnerable, weak, outnumbered. Relocating might have been their only chance to survive. A strange discovery. When White searched the abandoned settlement, he noticed something else. There were no signs of violence, no burned houses, no scattered weapons, no skeletons. Instead, the buildings had been carefully dismantled, boards removed, structures taken apart piece by piece. The settlers had left on purpose, and they had taken their supplies with them. This was not a massacre. It was a planned migration. But where exactly had they gone? England's silence. When White returned to England, he told everyone the story. But England had moved on. The country was celebrating its victory over Spain. The defeat of the Spanish Armada had made England a rising global power. The mystery of a small, failed colony across the ocean didn't seem important anymore. No rescue mission was launched, no official investigation was funded. Roanoke slowly faded into legend, but rumors began to spread. The stories of the native tribes. Years later, English settlers who arrived in North America heard strange stories from native tribes. Some claimed that white-skinned people had once lived among them. Others spoke of villages where people had gray eyes and lighter hair. One explorer even reported meeting a tribe that spoke a few English words. One of those explorers was John Lawson. In the early 1700s, Lawson traveled through the forests of what is now North Carolina. During his journey, he met members of the Hatteras tribe. They told him something incredible. They believed their ancestors had once welcomed English settlers into their tribe. Some tribe members even had European features. Lawson wrote in his journal that several Hatteras people had gray eyes, a rare trait among Native Americans. Could these have been descendants of the lost colony? The map with a secret. More than 400 years after the colony vanished, researchers discovered something remarkable: an old map drawn by John White himself. The map showed the coastline of early Virginia, but something about it seemed unusual. Under a small patch of paper glued to the map, there was another symbol. When researchers carefully removed the patch, they found a hidden marking, a small fort symbol. It suggested the settlers might have planned to move 50 miles inland to a location near what is now the CROATOAN River. If the settlers had traveled inland, they might have built a second colony far from the dangerous coast, hidden in the forests, protected from hostile tribes, and perhaps hidden from history. The archaeological hunt. Modern archaeologists have spent decades searching for evidence of the missing colonists. Excavations on Hatteras Island uncovered strange artifacts: English pottery, metal tools, fragments of early European weapons, but they were mixed with Native American objects, suggesting something unusual. Not a European colony, not a native village, but a blended community. Some historians believe the settlers joined native tribes and slowly merged into their culture. Over generations, their identity disappeared, their story faded, until only rumors remained. The darker theories. Not everyone agrees with the peaceful integration theory. Some historians believe the settlers were attacked by hostile tribes. One possible suspect was the powerful chief Powhatan. Powhatan ruled a large confederation of tribes in what is now Virginia. According to later English colonists in Jamestown, Powhatan once claimed he had destroyed a group of English settlers who lived among rival tribes. Some historians wonder if he was talking about the lost colonists of Roanoke, but no proof has ever been found. The mystery grows. For centuries, the disappearance of the Roanoke settlers remained one of the greatest mysteries in American history. More than 115 men, women, and children vanished without a trace. No letters, no graves, no clear answers. Only a single carved word: CROATOAN. But in recent years, archaeologists have made discoveries that might finally reveal the truth. Clues buried beneath centuries of soil, artifacts that should not exist, evidence suggesting the settlers did survive, just not in the way anyone expected.
The gold ring and the forgotten graves. The wind over Hatteras Island never truly stops. It moves across the sand dunes in long whispers, shifting the landscape slowly, year after year. The island looks peaceful from a distance: long beaches, tall grasses, and the endless blue of the Atlantic Ocean. But beneath that sand lies centuries of buried history. In 2015, a small group of archaeologists arrived on the island with a simple goal: search for more evidence connected to the mysterious settlers of Roanoke Island. For over 400 years, historians had debated what happened to the colony that vanished. Did the settlers die? Were they killed? Or did they somehow survive? The team began carefully digging through layers of soil near the location of an old native settlement once connected to the CROATOAN tribe. For days, the excavation produced nothing unusual. Animal bones, fragments of pottery, stone tools used by native hunters. Then, one afternoon, a graduate student brushing sand away from a small trench noticed something glinting in the sunlight: a thin circle of metal. At first, it looked like a piece of scrap, but when the object was cleaned and lifted from the soil, everyone froze. It was a ring, a gold signet ring. A ring from another world. The ring was small but beautifully crafted. Its surface carried the faint engraving of a crest. The style looked unmistakably European, more specifically, English. Jewelry experts examined the ring closely. They believed it dated back to the late 1500s, the exact time when the Roanoke settlers disappeared. That alone was astonishing, because no English settlements were supposed to exist in the region after Roanoke collapsed.
Yet here was a piece of European jewelry buried among native artifacts on Hatteras Island. It meant one thing. An English person had once been here, living among the CROATOAN people. Who owned the ring? Historians immediately began asking an important question. Who could have owned the ring? Signet rings were not common among ordinary settlers. They were usually worn by people of status, leaders, officials, merchants, members of important families. One possible candidate was John White himself. White was known to wear a signet ring in England, but there was a problem with that theory. White never returned to CROATOAN Island after leaving the abandoned colony. His ship had been forced to sail back to England because of a violent storm. So if the ring belonged to him, how did it end up buried here? Another theory emerged. Perhaps the ring belonged to one of the Roanoke colonists who traveled to CROATOAN after White left. If the settlers had relocated there, they might have brought personal belongings with them, including valuable jewelry. But even that theory raised more questions. Why would someone bury such a valuable ring? Was it lost, hidden, or placed deliberately in the ground? The forgotten graves. Around the same time the ring was discovered, archaeologists began exploring another site deeper in the forests of North Carolina. This area was close to the mysterious inland location suggested by the hidden map symbol discovered on John White's chart. The excavation site had already produced small fragments of English pottery and metal tools. But one morning, a researcher's shovel struck something harder than soil: wood. Carefully, the team brushed away the dirt. Beneath the surface, they uncovered the outline of a shallow pit. Inside it were fragments of rotting timber arranged in a rectangular shape. It looked disturbingly familiar. A coffin. But coffins were extremely rare among Native American burial traditions. Most tribes buried their dead differently. The discovery suggested something shocking. This grave might belong to an English settler. A silent witness. The team carefully opened the grave. Inside were skeletal remains. Time had eroded much of the bone, but some fragments remained intact. The skeleton appeared to belong to an adult, but determining the exact identity was impossible. No clothing survived. No personal objects remained. Just bones. Still, the burial style looked European. Straight body position, wooden coffin structure, simple grave pit. All signs pointed toward an English burial. If true, this would mean something extraordinary. At least one Roanoke colonist had survived long enough to travel inland and had been buried there. The CROATOAN Alliance. Historians increasingly believe the Roanoke settlers may have survived through an alliance with the CROATOAN tribe. The leader of that tribe, Manto, had long been friendly toward the English explorers. Years earlier, Manto had traveled to England with explorers working for Sir Walter Raleigh. He even met Elizabeth I. Because of his loyalty, Raleigh gave Manto a special title. He became the first Native American officially recognized as a Lord of Roanoke. If any tribe was willing to protect the settlers after Governor White left, it would have been Manto's people. The CROATOAN tribe may have offered shelter, food, protection, and eventually a new life.
In the dense forests of North Carolina, the ground holds secrets older than the United States itself. Towering oak trees stretch toward the sky. Thick vines crawl along the forest floor. Sunlight barely reaches the ground beneath the heavy canopy. For centuries, this wilderness remained largely untouched. But somewhere in these woods, historians believe the final chapter of the lost colony might be waiting.
The mystery that began at Roanoke Island had slowly spread inland. Clues had appeared on Hatteras Island. Artifacts had been found near the Chowan River, and now archaeologists were searching deeper in the forest. Because if the settlers had migrated inland, some of them might have died there, and their graves might still remain. The discovery beneath the roots. The excavation team arrived early in the morning. Mist hung between the trees as researchers carefully marked a small clearing where ground-penetrating radar had detected unusual shapes beneath the soil. The radar images suggested something rectangular, possibly several structures, or perhaps graves. Shovels moved slowly through the soft dirt. Layer by layer, the soil was removed. At first, nothing appeared, just roots, rocks, ancient leaves turned into dark compost. Then, one of the archaeologists noticed something pale emerging from the ground. Bone. Everyone stopped. The team carefully brushed away the surrounding soil. Slowly, the shape of a human skull appeared beneath the earth, and then another bone beside it. Within hours, the outline of a skeleton was visible beneath the earth. It was the first of several. Not a Native American burial. The discovery shocked the researchers. Native American tribes in the region had very specific burial traditions. Many tribes placed bodies in different positions or used ceremonial methods for burial. But this skeleton looked different. The body had been buried in a straight position with arms resting along the sides, a method commonly used in European burials. Nearby, archaeologists found fragments of iron nails. The nails may have come from a wooden coffin that had rotted away centuries earlier. This detail was important because coffin burials were rare among the native tribes of coastal Carolina, but they were common among Europeans, which meant the skeleton might belong to an English settler, possibly one of the lost colonists. A lost traveler. If the skeleton truly belonged to a Roanoke colonist, it raised a powerful question. How did the person end up buried so far inland? The location was nearly 50 miles away from Roanoke Island, a long journey through dense forests and unfamiliar territory. Historians believe the settlers may have split into groups after leaving the colony. One group may have traveled south toward the friendly CROATOAN tribe. Another group may have followed the hidden plan suggested on the map drawn by John White, a journey inland to establish a safer settlement. The skeleton might belong to one of those travelers, someone who died during the migration, or someone who lived in the inland colony that never appeared in history books. The weapon in the soil. As archaeologists continued digging around the gravesite, they discovered another object, a rusted piece of metal buried near the skeleton's hip. At first, it looked like a broken tool, but after cleaning it carefully, the researchers realized what they had found, a fragment of a rapier sword. Rapiers were slender European swords carried by English gentlemen and soldiers in the late 1500s. They were not weapons used by native tribes in the region. Finding such an object near the skeleton strengthened the theory that the grave belonged to a European settler, possibly one of the lost colonists. The two-colony theory. Over time, historians began forming a new idea about the fate of the Roanoke colony. Instead of disappearing completely, the colonists may have divided into two groups. The first group traveled to CROATOAN Island, where they lived among the tribe led by Monteo. The second group moved inland, possibly following the plan marked on the secret map. If that theory is correct, then two separate communities of Roanoke survivors may have existed, one coastal, one inland, both slowly merging into native cultures. Over generations, the original English identity would fade, leaving only small traces behind. A connection to Jamestown. 20 years after the disappearance of the Roanoke colony, another group of English settlers arrived in North America. In 1607, they established a new settlement at Jamestown. Jamestown became the first successful English colony in the New World. But the settlers there soon heard strange rumors from native tribes. Stories about white-skinned people living among inland tribes. Stories about villages where European tools were being used. Even more disturbingly, the leader of the powerful Powhatan once reportedly told English settlers that he had destroyed a group of English colonists living among rival tribes. Some historians believe he might have been referring to the survivors of the Roanoke colony. If true, it means at least some of the settlers survived long enough to reach inland territories, but their final fate may have been violent. Evidence of blended cultures. Archaeologists studying inland native villages have occasionally discovered objects that shouldn't be there. European metal tools, English pottery, fragments of firearms. These objects appear in settlements dating from the late 1500s and early 1600s, the exact period after the Roanoke colony vanished. Some historians believe these items came from trade. Others think they were brought by the lost settlers themselves. If the Roanoke colonists joined native communities, they would have introduced European technology to those tribes: metal knives, iron tools, gunpowder weapons. Over time, these objects would become part of their everyday life. The story that refuses to end. Despite centuries of research, the Roanoke mystery remains unsolved. Each new discovery answers one question, but creates another. The skeleton in the forest proves that someone with European burial customs died far inland. But was it truly a Roanoke colonist? The sword fragment proves a European weapon existed there. But who carried it? The gold ring found on Hatteras Island suggests English settlers lived among native tribes. But how many survived, and for how long? A mystery hidden in bloodlines. Some researchers believe the final answer may not be buried in the ground at all. Instead, it may exist in DNA. Modern genetic studies are beginning to examine the ancestry of tribes in coastal North Carolina. Some individuals show small traces of European ancestry that appear earlier than expected, possibly dating back to the late 1500s. If confirmed, it would suggest something extraordinary, that the descendants of the lost colony may still be alive today, living ordinary lives, unaware that their ancestors were part of one of America's greatest historical mysteries. But one final clue may change everything. In recent years, archaeologists uncovered something even more surprising, an artifact that should not exist at all, an object hidden beneath centuries of sand, an object engraved with symbols that may connect directly to the Roanoke colonists. If its origin can be proven, it might finally reveal the truth about the settlers who vanished in 1857.